The engine hummed beneath her, a steady low purr, as Evelyn Hart pulled her hybrid SUV into the circular driveway of a sprawling colonial nestled in the quiet suburb of Lakeview Ridge. Morning mist clung to the earth like memory. Her coffee, still warm in its thermal mug, steamed slightly in the cool autumn air as she cracked the window and breathed in the scent of wet leaves and impending change. This was always her favorite moment, those hushed seconds before the world stirred. Before the moving trucks pulled in. Before fragile lives were boxed into labeled compartments. Before decades of memories were upended in a single afternoon. She reached across to the passenger seat, fingertips brushing the soft leather of her worn clipboard. It bore the scars of 100 transitions, notes, tears, names she would never forget. Today was Mrs. Weatherly's move. 87 years old, a retired librarian. Sharp as a tack but increasingly frail. Her husband had passed away in May. She'd called Evelyn after a panic attack triggered by the prospect of giving up the home they'd shared for 62 years. Evelyn had come the very next day. That was how GentleShift worked. That was how Evelyn worked. Slowly, personally, with care. Then came the voice. Floating through the morning air, casual and venomous, it slipped into the car like smoke. Evelyn froze. No, she has no clue, the voice said. Laughter followed, low and cold. She still thinks I believe in all that sentimental crap. Legacy, memory, emotional dignity, or whatever. But we're done hand-holding old people through their trauma. Evelyn turned her head slowly, eyes narrowing toward the sound. Alyssa Ramirez, parked 2 houses down, leaned back in the driver's seat of her glossy black Tesla, Bluetooth earpiece glowing blue in the dimness, speaking with the easy confidence of someone who'd already closed the deal. I've already spoken to the investors, she continued. Once we push Evelyn out, we can triple throughput. Standardize every damn thing. Pre-packed packages, fixed-time consultations, skip all that memory chest nonsense. The board meeting's perfect timing. I'll have the pitch and the proof. Missed deadlines, inconsistent structure, emotional inefficiency. She'll never see it coming. Evelyn's breath caught mid-inhale. Her coffee mug trembled slightly in her grip. The clipboard slid off the passenger seat and landed with a soft thud. Her heart pounded not just with betrayal, but with clarity. Alyssa, her partner, the woman she'd mentored, elevated, made co-founder 2 years ago, the woman who had cried in her office after the death of her mother, the one Evelyn had trusted with everything. Evelyn's eyes never left Alyssa as she continued laughing. Just be ready with the capital when I call. The moment she's gone, we go full scale. We're sitting on a gold mine, and she's too stuck in the past to cash in. The door of the house opened, and Evelyn watched Alyssa straighten her posture, plaster on a dazzling smile, and slip her phone into her coat pocket like nothing had happened. She walked up the stone path to greet Mrs. Weatherly, who appeared at the threshold like a figure from a dream, frail, hopeful, unaware. Evelyn didn't move. Not for minutes. She sat in her car, the silence deafening now, except for the sound of her own heartbeat, echoing like footsteps in an empty home. This was not just betrayal. This was an ambush disguised as strategy, a gutting of the soul she'd poured into this company. It wasn't about leadership or metrics. It was about philosophy, about everything GentleShift stood for. And as she finally stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, her back straight, despite the invisible blow, one thought looped quietly in her mind, steady and burning. You think I won't see it coming, but I already have. Evelyn's why, the soul of the shift. That night, long after the Weatherly move had been completed, and the last fragile glass teacup had been swaddled in paper and placed reverently into a padded box, Evelyn Hart sat alone in her study. The soft tick of the grandfather clock her father left her filled the space like a heartbeat, steady and solemn. The silence after betrayal had a particular flavor, bitter, not loud, but dense. It filled the corners of her chest, pressed behind her eyes. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt the most. It was the realization that it had been so deliberate, so calculated. And yet, she didn't cry. Instead, Evelyn opened the bottom drawer of the walnut filing cabinet near her desk. She reached for the first folder ever created for GentleShift, still labeled in neat, slightly slanted handwriting. Client number 001, Agnes Willoughby. She had been 89, nearly blind, widowed, no children, no family, no one to help her move from the home she'd lived in for 57 years to a small assisted living unit on the edge of Bay Summit. Evelyn had been a discharge planner at the time, her job to coordinate post-hospital transitions for elderly patients. Most days were a triage of bureaucracy and red tape. But that day, something broke. Mrs. Willoughby had clutched Evelyn's hand with surprising strength, tears brimming in her clouded eyes. "I can't leave this house," she'd whispered. "I'll vanish." That sentence had followed Evelyn home, haunted her like a ghost. So she went back the next day on her day off. She spent 9 hours with Agnes, helped her sort through drawers filled with her late husband's war medals, her own handwritten poetry, mismatched china sets that had witnessed decades of quiet dinners. They talked, laughed, wept. When the move came, Evelyn had packed each box with stories, not just objects. On the first night in the new apartment, she had stayed until midnight, arranging the photographs just so, placing the worn velvet reading chair under the window facing west. Agnes had looked around and sighed. Not with sorrow, but with relief. "I thought I was losing my life," she'd said, "but you brought it with me." That was the moment GentleShift was born. Not on paper, not in the bank, but in that silence, that breath between loss and continuity, that sacred pause when a stranger realizes they've been seen. Evelyn had emptied her savings account within 3 weeks, left the hospital job within 2 months, remortgaged the cottage she'd inherited from her grandmother. She created GentleShift not to move things, but to move people with grace. Now, staring at the folder with Agnes's name, her fingertips grazing the corners worn soft with age, Evelyn let herself feel it. Grief. Grief for the mission she built. Grief for the trust she'd placed in Alyssa Ramirez, who had come into her life like a force of nature 2 years ago. Young, brilliant, market-savvy. She'd seemed so captivated by Evelyn's vision, spoke with reverence about the emotional intelligence of the work. But somewhere between expansion plans and digital scheduling systems, Evelyn had sensed a shift. Small, at first. Suggestions to trim consultation time. Quiet pushes for pre-formatted memory chests. Then came the workshops about growth velocity and brand scalability. Evelyn had resisted, gently but firmly. She hadn't realized that Alyssa hadn't just disagreed. She had decided Evelyn was in the way. Alyssa hadn't betrayed Evelyn to save the company. She'd betrayed her to sell it. But Evelyn wasn't naive. She was a woman who had held trembling hands through loss, had sat on floors beside packed boxes, listening to confessions about regret and missed goodbyes. She had faced death, denial, dementia. She had seen what transition did to people when it was rushed, cold, impersonal. And she had vowed never to allow it on her watch. Now, that watch was threatened. And Evelyn Hart, daughter of an Alzheimer's nurse, granddaughter of a homemaker who'd raised 3 generations in a single cottage, was not about to let the soul of her life's work be stripped for efficiency charts and profit margins. Her face reflected in the darkened window, older now, lined with the lines that come from loving hard and losing with dignity. She stood, shoulders squared, and walked to her desk. She pulled a fresh notepad from the drawer and wrote 2 words in ink so bold it bled through the page. Plan B. Not revenge. Not war. Preservation. She would not scream. She would not beg. She would not fight to stay in a system already being hollowed out from within. She would build something better. And this time, no one would see it coming. The watcher's silence, planting the seeds. The next morning, the house still smelled faintly of chamomile tea and lavender soap, but Evelyn Hart's expression was unreadable. She had slept little. Her eyes bore no trace of fatigue. Only resolve. By 6:30 a.m., she was at the GentleShift headquarters, a 2-story craftsman nestled between maple trees at the edge of Bay Summit's historic quarter. The windows still glowed warm, the hanging sign gently swinging in the autumn wind. GentleShift. Because home is a feeling. She stood outside for a moment, keys in hand, staring at the place she had built. Then, she stepped in. Her steps echoed through the early silence of the house. She greeted the morning light, the same way she always did, lighting the candle at the reception desk, checking the day's client roster, brewing the staff coffee, with that steady ritualistic care that made even the simplest moments feel sacred. But today, Evelyn wasn't just preparing for another day. She was preparing for the last days of something sacred, and the beginning of something entirely new. At 7:10 a.m., Alyssa Ramirez arrived, polished as always, in a sharp navy blazer, carrying a tablet like a weapon. She glanced at Evelyn with a bright, calculated smile. "You're here early." "So are you?" Evelyn replied smoothly. "I like to stay ahead of the day," Alyssa said, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Especially with the Weatherly move follow-up and the efficiency meeting at 10. Evelyn didn't blink. "I'll be shadowing Dominic on the Myers consult. It's his first solo intake. Free." Alyssa's smile faltered for the briefest moment. "Actually, I reassigned that to Julia. Dominic's prepping for a new referral package I'm piloting." Referral package. That wasn't language Evelyn had ever used. And Julia, though kind, was methodical, less intuitive, more clipboard than heart. Evelyn nodded once. "Noted." She made no fuss. Not yet. But she was watching. Over the next 3 days, she said little. She moved like a ghost, with purpose present but not loud. She stayed late, came in early, reviewed files, traced Alyssa's scheduling changes, the new language creeping into their materials, standardized solutions, streamlined packages, priority scaling. She watched as older clients were quietly deprioritized in favor of newer, wealthier referrals. She noticed staff being pulled aside. Dominic no longer shared project updates in their weekly check-ins. Lynette, the heart of operations, looked constantly torn. Even Zora at the front desk had begun redirecting calls to Alyssa's voicemail calls that once would have landed with Evelyn directly. Each night, Evelyn recorded her observations in her private logbook, not on the shared server, but in pen and ink, the old-fashioned way. Each entry began with a date and one question: what is still worth saving? And each day, the answer grew clearer. Everything the metrics couldn't measure. The handwritten notes about Mrs. Temple's panic attacks before moving day. The voice memos from Mr. Harvey's daughter, thanking them for giving her father dignity during his final weeks. The post-move tea rituals Evelyn created to help clients settle on their first night. The handwritten cards they sent on anniversaries of a spouse's passing. These weren't scalable, but they were sacred. She reached out to old contacts discreetly. Directors at retirement homes, elder law attorneys, hospice coordinators. Not to warn. Not yet. Just reconnecting. "How's GentleShift these days?" they would ask. She always answered, "Evolving." Which was, after all, the truth. Because while Alyssa planned her pivot, Evelyn was already drawing new lines. She began quietly converting her personal methodology binder into digital format privately. Not the watered-down team version, but the soul of GentleShift, the unspoken protocols that made it more than a company, the way a touch, a pause, a silence could mean more than a brochure ever could. On Thursday afternoon, while the team gathered in the main conference room for the growth optimization training, Evelyn stepped out. She said she had client calls. In truth, she met with Irina Delaney, director of Meadowbrook Residences, their largest referral partner. They sat at a corner table at the Lantern Cafe, surrounded by aging ivy and steaming espresso cups. "You look tired," Irina said gently. "I'm just thinking," Evelyn replied. "About the company you built?" "No," Evelyn said slowly. "About the version that's trying to replace it." Irina waited. "I'm considering something new," Evelyn said, choosing each word with care. "A consulting initiative focused on helping retirement communities build their own transition support programs. Something emotional, not just logistical. Something rooted in psychology, memory, continuity." Irina leaned forward, eyes bright. "We've needed something like that for years." "I'd need to work with a few pilot sites," Evelyn continued. "Preferably communities that believe in honoring the story, not just the stuff." Irina didn't hesitate. "You have your first partner, Evelyn. We're in." They clinked espresso cups. By the time she returned to the office that evening, Evelyn had secured verbal agreements from 3 additional facilities. She sent a single email to her legal advisor, subject line, Begin draft, independent transition program, non-compete compliant. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. That night, as she locked up the office, Evelyn paused in the hallway outside Alyssa's office. Through the frosted glass, she saw her former protege bent over a laptop, voice low on the phone. She still doesn't suspect a thing, Alyssa was saying. We'll finalize the investor presentation next week. By month's end, GentleShift will be ours. Evelyn didn't flinch. She turned, walked into the darkness of the autumn night, her breath calm in the chill air. Some people fought storms. Others became them. The retreat, where masks fall and power shifts. The invitation arrived in a glossy envelope sealed with a gold emblem. GentleShift Annual Leadership Retreat. 3 days to define the future. The location? A lakeside conference center 2 hours outside Bay Summit, surrounded by pine forests and luxury cabins. The kind of place where corporate ambitions disguise themselves as vision quests. Evelyn Hart packed her bags with practiced hands, slipping her binder of personal notes between cashmere sweaters and neutral heels. She checked her voice recorder, charged and ready. Not because she needed evidence, but because she needed clarity. They departed in separate cars. Alyssa had offered to drive as a gesture of leadership unity, but Evelyn declined. I'll be heading back early Sunday. Personal obligation. It wasn't a lie. She had a meeting with destiny. When she arrived at the conference center, the team was already gathered on the sun-drenched terrace. Alyssa stood at the center, laughing lightly, dressed in crisp beige and clutching a sparkling water like it was a microphone. Her tone was enthusiastic, her eyes calculating. Evelyn blended in effortlessly. She laughed at the appropriate moments, took notes during the first session on scaling through structure, and asked a few innocuous questions during the workshop titled From Boutique to Brand. She let Alyssa believe her silence meant surrender. The first day ended with wine by the lake and a carefully curated playlist of acoustic covers. As the sun dipped below the tree line, Evelyn caught whispers Alyssa meeting in hushed tones with 2 men in suits by the fire pit. On the second day, the consultant arrived. He introduced himself as Graham Stanton, silver-haired, charismatic, confident. I specialize in identifying untapped potential in founder-led businesses, he announced. What I see here is a goldmine of emotional branding, ready to be scaled. Evelyn asked only one question. And how do you preserve soul in scale? Graham's answer was immediate. You extract it, then replicate it. Alyssa beamed. Evelyn simply nodded. That night, under the guise of leadership alignment conversations, Alyssa asked Evelyn to take a walk by the lakeside path. The air was cool, the moon sharp above them. Tomorrow, I'll be making an announcement, Alyssa said, her voice a blend of honey and steel. Graham's firm is prepared to inject capital into GentleShift. 7 figures. Impressive, Evelyn said softly. It'll mean structural changes, of course, Alyssa continued. A professional board, streamlined roles. You'll still be the face, of course. The legacy, the story. But not the decision-maker, Evelyn replied, her voice unreadable. Alyssa hesitated. You've built something amazing, but founders, they don't always scale. This is about evolution. And what happens to the clients who don't fit the model? Evelyn asked. Alyssa's smile didn't reach her eyes. We'll coach them toward modern expectations. Evelyn looked out across the black water. Thank you for telling me. Alyssa relaxed. I wanted you to hear it from me. She didn't notice Evelyn's hand inside her coat pocket, gently pressing record. The next morning dawned clear and sharp. The team filed into the glass-walled conference hall for the final session. On the screen behind the podium flashed the title, Strategic Restructuring, GentleShift 2.0. Alyssa stepped forward. Her speech was polished, her tone magnetic. She spoke of growth, of scalability, of becoming the national leader in transitional living services. She introduced Graham Stanton. He discussed operational efficiency, investor optimism, and a phase-out of founder-dependent protocols. Evelyn listened in silence. Then she stood. "I have something to say before we conclude," she said, stepping toward the front. The room fell quiet. 8 years ago, I founded GentleShift because I believed no one should feel like a burden in their final chapter. We weren't just moving boxes, we were carrying decades of memory, pain, and love from one space to another. That philosophy has always been our North Star. She turned to the team. But philosophy isn't scalable. That's what I've heard these past few days. So I've made a decision. She paused. I am resigning as CEO of GentleShift. Gasps Echoed. Alyssa froze. Graham blinked. Evelyn continued. Effective as of this morning, I've accepted a new role, Director of Transitional Wellness, for a consortium of retirement communities representing over 2,000 residents across the state. My team and I will be developing proprietary emotional wellness programs tailored to senior transitions. She glanced at Alyssa. This includes an exclusive referral network based on quality standards, standards which I will define, train, and certify. Dead silence. I am not competing with GentleShift. I am preserving what made it matter. She looked to her staff. To those who felt torn these past months, I offer you a choice, not obligation. The door is open. Then, one by one, they stood. Zora, Lunette, Dominic, 7 others. Alyssa's face went pale. Graham checked his phone, texting furiously. You think this is a win? Alyssa hissed as Evelyn gathered her papers. No, Evelyn said quietly. I think it's the end of a war you started against the wrong opponent. She walked out into the sunlight, the team behind her, the wind rising through the trees like applause. The fallout, final moves, and moral victory. The retreat ended not with applause, but with a vacuum. Alyssa stood frozen at the podium, watching the team she'd tried to commandeer walk out beside the very woman she'd hoped to replace. Graham's phone buzzed endlessly, his mask of confidence cracking with each unanswered message. Outside, Evelyn didn't look back. Within 24 hours, the emails started. The first was from Thaddeus Harlan, Evelyn's longtime legal advisor. Subject line: Asset separation and equity dissolution. Final draft ready. Then came a message from Sophie Lane, director of the Lakeside Senior Consortium. Welcome aboard, Evelyn. The board is thrilled to have you. Attached are the pilot program rollout schedules and initial disbursement contract. Oh, goat. By Monday, the official statement was live. Evelyn Hart, founder of GentleShift, has accepted a leadership role within the newly established Senior Life Alliance, developing trauma-informed transitional wellness programs across 6 regional retirement communities. Alyssa's inbox was flooded. Clients asked what the transition meant. Staff questioned continuity. Referral partners grew suddenly quiet. The brand she'd just acquired no longer held the heart that powered it. Then came the call. $2.4 million, Thaddeus said over the phone. That's what she's offering to buy out your majority stake. Evelyn blinked. She wants to buy me out? She wants control, Thaddeus corrected. You already gave up the title. She just wants the paperwork to match the illusion. Evelyn thought about it. She has investor backing? She does, he confirmed. But they're getting nervous. Without you, the client base is bleeding. They want to flip GentleShift within a year. Silence stretched between them. I'll accept, Evelyn said finally. But I want something more than money. What do you have in mind? I want the building, she replied. The Victorian on Hillside Avenue. Thaddeus paused, then chuckled. You always were one step ahead. Alyssa didn't hesitate. Within days, the deal was signed. Evelyn sold her equity. Alyssa bought the shell. And the office, the symbol of Evelyn's legacy, was quietly transferred to a new LLC, Heart Transition Institute. What Alyssa didn't know, couldn't know, was that Evelyn had already made her final move. On the night before she handed over the company, Evelyn walked through the halls of GentleShift one last time. She gathered her binders, her client notes, her mother's framed letter that once hung behind her desk, and she left behind a sealed envelope on Alyssa's new desk. Inside was a note. You bought a name, you bought a list, you bought a building you no longer own. What you didn't buy was the soul. That never had a price. The next morning, GentleShift employees arrived to locked doors. The property manager's email followed an hour later. Effective immediately, the lease at 812 Hillside Avenue has been terminated. The building is now under the ownership of Hart Institute for Transition Studies. Alyssa called. Furious. You tricked me. No, Evelyn replied calmly. You underestimated me. A new dawn. The rebirth of purpose. The new office was smaller. No mahogany reception desk. No gleaming foyer with curated music echoing off the walls. Just a modest space above a wellness center across the street from Lakeside Gardens, the largest retirement community in the region. But it was hers. Sunlight poured through the tall windows onto the hardwood floors. Evelyn set down her bag and walked slowly through the space, her fingertips grazing the newly painted walls. The scent of lemon oil and fresh linen still clung to the air. On one desk sat the same memory chest she had once designed for Mrs. Weatherly, now repurposed as her own keepsake box containing small tokens, handwritten letters from families, a pressed flower from Mrs. Dubois' garden. Lynette entered behind her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. It's not the Victorian, she said with a soft smile, but it smells like possibility. Evelyn took the mug. It smells like freedom. By the end of the first month, they had 22 clients. By the end of the third, Evelyn was speaking at regional conferences. 6 months in, she received the National Advocacy Award for Excellence in Elder Transition Services. When she stood at the podium, looking out over a ballroom filled with care directors, family liaisons, and facility managers, she didn't talk about her company. She talked about Mrs. Abernathy, who couldn't bring her thimble collection, but kept the story of each one. She talked about Mr. Fields, who cried over leaving the garden where he buried his dog but smiled when Evelyn laminated a photo of the gravestone and framed it for his new room. She talked about memory and weight and the subtle grief that no one sees but everyone feels. You can't scale compassion, she told the audience. But you can teach people how to see. Really see. That's what transition means. Not just from one home to another, but from oneself to the next. The applause was long. The standing ovation was not just for what she'd said, but for what she represented. An antidote to the corporate tide sweeping through elder care. A reminder that meaning matters more than margin. That night, Evelyn sat in her hotel room with a glass of red wine and opened her laptop. Dozens of messages waited for her, some from new communities wanting to join the consortium, others from clients whose transitions she'd supported years ago. One, at the bottom of the inbox, made her breath catch. Subject, from Mrs. Weatherly. Dear Evelyn, it's been 6 months since I moved. I thought you'd like to know that yesterday, for the first time, this place felt like home. I opened the memory chest you helped me create and realized something. I didn't lose anything. I just carried it differently. Thank you for helping me hold on in a new way. With love, Ruth Weatherly. Evelyn placed her hand over her heart and closed her eyes. This was why she walked away. And this was why it had never felt like losing. Full circle, the power of letting go. The news cut through her morning, like a blade hidden in silk. GentleShift had been sold again. This time, the company that Evelyn Hart had built brick by brick, story by story, had been swallowed whole by a national chain known for cold efficiency. The press release was clinical, an acquisition to scale elder relocation services across key markets. No mention of founders, no mention of humanity. The website, once brimming with personal notes and photos, morphed overnight into corporate minimalism service tiers, pricing grids, and a logo stripped of warmth. Evelyn sat at her desk in the small office above Lakeside Gardens, quiet sunlight falling across the hardwood floor. Behind her, on a low shelf, sat memory chests in progress, each box full of personal history, curated by someone who still believed that transition required care, not quotas. Her reflection in the window was calm, aged by grief, yes, but resolute. She didn't close her eyes in sadness. She simply inhaled, exhaled, and turned to the day's schedule. 2 new referrals this morning. Meadowbrook and St. Anthony's, Zora said softly as she entered. The phone in her hand shook slightly. Both cases were high anxiety, with families desperate for more than just moving boxes. Let's give them what GentleShift once did, Evelyn said quietly. Outside, autumn was painting the maples in flaming colors. Evelyn walked to the small patio at the back of her office, where Lynette had set out heirloom cookies for the staff mini pumpkin loaves handmade by Evelyn herself. She hadn't baked for months, but today felt different. They sat in silence, tasting the bread, watching sunlight ripple across the leaves. It's still just us, Lynette said, voice thick with emotion. Because we built something worth saving, Evelyn replied. And now we get to carry it forward. At noon, the conference room filled with sound, all not of corporate buzzwords, but of human stories. Families, facility directors, staff preparing memory plans for fragile clients. The energy throbbed with meaning. That afternoon, Evelyn took a call from a familiar number. She recognized the voice instantly. We never stood a chance, did we? She paused, no reaction. Then typed 2 words. You stood only if you cared. Ugh. She left the phone face down on her desk. In the evening, she drove past the old Victorian that had once been GentleShift's headquarters. It was quiet now. For lease. Its windows darkened. The words, "Move with dignity," were still etched faintly on the sign, a ghost of its promise. She pressed her palm to the glass. I built soul here, she whispered. Then stepped back, not in regret, but in acceptance. She didn't thank the place. She thanked herself for letting go with intention. Later, at home, she walked through her own living room, where framed letters from clients adorned a shelf. One letter from Mrs. Weatherly caught her eye, the one that said, I thought I was losing everything, but you helped me carry it. Evelyn squared her shoulders, touched the frame gently, then walked to her desk. She pulled out a new leather-bound journal, its pages blank. At the top, she wrote, Grand Opening, Heart Institute for Transitional Humanism. Beneath it, she began writing down her vision. Training modules, certification standards, community partnerships, a podcast to share stories of transitions done with dignity. Outside, night deepened. Inside, Evelyn's pen moved steadily in lamplight. She wrote not to rewrite the past, but to craft the future. And the future, at last, felt like home.